The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across Pyramid City, Nevada, as Abigail Turner's stagecoach rattled to a stop outside the dusty saloon. The year was 1875, and she had come west with nothing but determination, and the deed to her late uncle's ranch folded carefully in her reticule. As the dust settled around her, whispers from the locals reached her ears. "That's where he lives, up in those hills, the monster of Pyramid Valley." Abigail straightened her travel-worn dress and lifted her chin. After losing everything in Boston, she hadn't come all this way to be frightened by superstitious tales. The ranch was hers now, and no local ghost story would drive her away. "Miss, you shouldn't go up there alone," the stagecoach driver warned as he handed down her trunk. "That land borders his territory. Folks who trespass don't always come back." "I'm not trespassing on anyone's land," Abigail replied firmly. "I have the deed right here." She patted her reticule, though she couldn't deny the slight tremor in her hand. At 24, she'd faced enough hardship to know that fear would get her nowhere. The driver shook his head. "It ain't about legal papers, miss. That man. Some say he ain't even a man at all." Abigail thanked him for his concern but had already made up her mind. She arranged for her trunk to be delivered to her property the following day and took a room at the town's only hotel for the night. Sleep didn't come easily as she stared at the ceiling, wondering what manner of neighbor awaited her in the hills. Morning brought clarity and renewed purpose. Abigail hired a wagon and driver to take her to her uncle's property. As they traveled farther from town, the landscape grew more beautiful and wild. Mountains rose in the distance, and the desert bloomed with unexpected color. "This is as far as I go," the driver announced, stopping the wagon at the edge of a well-worn path. "Your uncle's place is just over that rise. And miss," he pointed to the north where rocky cliffs rose sharply against the sky, "don't go that way, that's his land." Abigail paid him extra to help carry her small bags to the cabin, but even with the additional money, he wouldn't stay long enough to help her settle in. By midday, she stood alone on the porch of her new home, a solidly built cabin with a small barn and corral beside it. The isolation was both thrilling and terrifying. For the first time in her life, Abigail was truly on her own. Her family's financial ruin and her parents' subsequent deaths had left her with few options in Boston. This inheritance had seemed like providence. Over the next few days, Abigail took stock of her situation. The cabin was in good repair, though dusty from disuse. Her uncle had left behind 4 horses, a milk cow, chickens, and enough preserved food to last until she could establish herself. The land was good, better than she'd expected in this part of Nevada, with a year-round creek running through it. But always, she felt watched. On her 5th day at the ranch, Abigail was hanging laundry when she heard a horse approach. A tall man with a sheriff's badge rode into her yard, his expression grave beneath his hat brim. "Miss Turner, I'm Sheriff Mason. Thought I should pay a visit seeing as you're new to these parts." He dismounted, removing his hat. "How are you finding Pyramid Valley?" "It's lovely, thank you," Abigail replied, noting the concern in his eyes. "Is something wrong, Sheriff? Just wondering if you've had any visitors." Abigail's heart quickened. "No, should I expect some?" the sheriff sighed, glancing toward the northern cliffs. "Your uncle kept to himself, mostly. Had an understanding with everyone around, including him." "Him? Folks call him the monster of Pyramid Valley. Real name's Roy Blackburn, lives up in those caves." Sheriff Mason pointed to the cliffs. "He came here during the war. No one knows much about him except that he's dangerous. Killed 3 men a few years back when they tried to run him off." "Were they trying to harm him?" Abigail asked. The sheriff looked surprised at her question. "Most folks don't ask that. They just hear killer and make up their minds." He adjusted his gun belt. The men were drunk, armed, and trespassing. Roy gave them warning. They didn't heed it. That hardly sounds monstrous, Abigail observed. There's more to it. He's different, scarred bad from burns, they say, keeps to himself. Only comes to town when absolutely necessary, and when he does, mothers pull their children inside. The sheriff replaced his hat. I'm just telling you so you'll be careful. Your uncle understood the boundaries. You'd be wise to do the same. After the sheriff left, Abigail couldn't stop thinking about her mysterious neighbor. That night, she studied her property maps by lamplight. According to the boundaries, the creek that provided her water originated on Blackburn's land. Over the next week, Abigail established a routine. She tended to the animals, cleaned the cabin, and explored her property, always conscious of the northern boundary. Despite the sheriff's warnings, she felt drawn to the forbidden territory, curious about the man everyone feared. Then came the drought. What had been a hot summer turned punishing. The creek dwindled to a trickle, and Abigail watched with growing concern as her pastures began to yellow. Without steady water, she wouldn't make it through the season. One morning, she woke to find the creek bed completely dry. Panic gripped her as she checked her water barrels, enough for perhaps 3 days if she was careful. The animals would suffer sooner. Making a decision that others might call foolish, Abigail saddled her mare and rode north, following the dry creek bed into forbidden territory. The landscape grew more rugged as she climbed. The summer heat reflected off rock faces, and Abigail was sweating profusely by the time she saw it, a small dam of rocks and logs that diverted the creek away from her property. The construction was recent. This was no natural occurrence. As she dismounted to examine it, the hairs on her neck stood up. Someone was watching. You're trespassing. The voice was deep and rough, as if seldom used. Abigail turned slowly to find a man standing 20 paces away, a rifle held casually at his side. Her breath caught. He was tall, powerfully built, and dressed in simple, well-worn clothes. But it was his face that held her attention. The right side was handsome enough, strong jaw, straight nose, piercing blue eye. The left side was a map of scars, the skin rippled and discolored from severe burns. His left eye was milky, clearly blind, and the corner of his mouth pulled downward from the scarred tissue. "Mr. Blackburn." Abigail's voice was steadier than she expected. Surprise flickered across his face. "You know my name. I'm Abigail Turner. I inherited my uncle's property south of yours." She gestured to the dam. "Someone diverted the creek. My animals will die without water." He studied her silently, his good eye narrowed. "Your uncle understood respect. 2 days on that property and you're trespassing." "It's been 2 weeks, actually," Abigail corrected him. "And I wouldn't be here if I hadn't woken to a dry creek bed. Did you build this dam?" "Yes." No apology, no explanation. "Why?" A muscle ticked in his jaw. "Because I need the water." "So do I," Abigail countered. "That creek has served both properties for years. Your uncle didn't let his cattle trample the upper creek banks," Roy cut in, his voice sharp. "Your animals have been muddying my water source. I warned you with a messenger. You ignored it." Abigail frowned. "I received no message." For a moment he seemed uncertain, then his expression hardened again. "Town probably decided you were better off not dealing with the monster." His bitter emphasis on the word made Abigail flinch. "I'm not afraid of you, Mr. Blackburn." A harsh laugh escaped him. "Then you're a fool." "I'm a woman trying to survive," Abigail replied. "Just like you're a man doing the same. Now, about this creek, surely we can reach an agreement that serves us both." Roy stared at her for a long moment, his scarred face unreadable. Finally, he slung his rifle over his shoulder. "Fence off the north section of your property where the creek enters. Keep your animals away from that stretch. I'll remove the dam. Relief flooded her. Thank you. I'll start on the fence today. See that you do. He turned to leave, then paused. Your uncle was a fair man. I respected him. I hope to earn the same respect, Abigail said softly. Roy Blackburn gave her one last assessing look before disappearing among the rocks as silently as he had appeared. True to her word, Abigail began work on the fence that very afternoon. It was grueling labor in the heat, but she was determined to keep her promise. By sundown, she had set several posts but was still far from finishing. Exhausted, she returned to her cabin to find a surprise waiting. The water was flowing again. The dam had been removed already, though she'd barely begun her part of the bargain. The next morning, Abigail rode into town for supplies. The storekeeper raised his eyebrows when she requested fencing materials. Building something special, Miss Turner. Just a fence along the North Creek, she replied, counting out her money. The store fell silent. When she looked up, every face was turned toward her. You've been up there. The storekeeper's voice was hushed. To his land, Abigail straightened her shoulders. I met Mr. Blackburn yesterday. We came to an agreement about the water rights. Whispers erupted around her. A woman pulled her child closer. The storekeeper leaned forward. Miss Turner, that man is dangerous. Did he hurt you? Of course not, Abigail replied sharply. He was perfectly reasonable. Reasonable. A man laughed from the corner. Lady, that thing ain't reasonable. He's killed men for less than stepping on his land. Abigail turned to face him. And were those men threatening him at the time? The man faltered. Well, Mr. Blackburn and I have reached an understanding, Abigail said firmly. I would appreciate the fencing materials delivered to my property today, if possible. As she left the store, she could feel the stares boring into her back. Their fear was palpable, but she couldn't reconcile their monster with the man she'd met. Stern, yes. Intimidating, certainly. But there had been something in his eyes, his good eye, at least something that spoke of pain rather than malice. The fencing materials arrived that afternoon, along with plenty of unsolicited advice about staying away from that monster. Abigail thanked the delivery man politely but firmly closed her door on his warnings. For 3 days, she worked on the fence, struggling with the heavy posts and wire. On the 4th morning, she awoke to find half the remaining work completed. Fresh post holes had been dug and posts set perfectly straight. She stared in amazement, then scanned the cliffs to the north. Nothing moved, but she knew he was watching. Thank you, she called out, feeling slightly foolish addressing the empty landscape. There was no response, but she hadn't expected one. That night, a summer storm blew in, bringing welcome rain but also fierce wind. Abigail was awakened by a crash as something hit her roof. Water began dripping through the ceiling. Grabbing a lantern, she ventured outside to find a large branch had broken off the old oak tree and punched a hole in her roof. Rain poured down, soaking her to the skin as she tried to assess the damage. There was no way she could repair it alone, especially not in the dark and rain. As she stood there, frustrated and increasingly drenched, a figure emerged from the darkness. Roy Blackburn stood at the edge of her yard, water streaming down his scarred face. Without a word, he strode to the barn, emerging moments later with a ladder and tools. He climbed onto the roof and worked quickly, covering the hole with a piece of tarp and securing it against the wind. When he climbed down, Abigail was waiting with a towel and her lantern. Thank you, she said, offering him the towel. Would you like to come inside until the rain lets up? He hesitated, then shook his head, water dripping from his hat brim. It's not proper. Abigail almost smiled. I think we're past worrying about proprieties, Mr. Blackburn. You're soaked. It's the middle of the night, and you just saved my home from being flooded. The least I can offer is coffee." After a moment's consideration, he nodded curtly and followed her inside. In the lamplight, his scars looked even more severe. Abigail busied herself making coffee, conscious of his discomfort as he stood awkwardly near the door. "Please sit," she urged, gesturing to a chair at her small table. "And you might as well call me Abigail. It seems silly to be formal after all this." "Roy," he offered gruffly, finally taking a seat. She placed a steaming mug before him. "How did you know about my roof?" He wrapped his large hands around the mug. "I was checking the creek, heard the crash." "You were out in this weather checking the creek," he shrugged. "Flash floods are dangerous. Creek rises fast in the Narrows." "You were making sure my property wouldn't flood," Abigail realized. "That's why you were close enough to help with the roof." Roy didn't answer directly, taking a sip of coffee instead. "The fence looks good." "It would have taken me another week without your help," Abigail admitted. "I've never built a fence before. Your uncle used to say city folks don't know what they're getting into out here." For the first time, something like amusement flickered in his eye. "He was right," Abigail laughed softly. "But I'm learning." They fell into surprisingly comfortable conversation as the storm raged outside. Roy explained how the weather patterns worked in the valley, which plants were edible, which snakes to avoid. Abigail found herself forgetting about his scars as she listened to his deep, quiet voice. When the rain finally stopped, Roy rose to leave. At the door, he hesitated. "Your roof needs proper fixing. I'll come tomorrow." "I can pay you," Abigail offered quickly. He shook his head. "Not necessary." He paused, then added awkwardly, "I have books if you want to borrow some." Abigail's face lit up. "I'd love that. I finished the only 2 I brought with me weeks ago." For a moment, his stern expression softened. "I'll bring some tomorrow." As promised, Roy appeared the next morning with tools, lumber, and a stack of books tied with twine. He worked efficiently on the roof while Abigail prepared a midday meal. When she called him down to eat, he seemed surprised by the invitation. "It's just stew," she said, noting his hesitation. "But there's plenty." They ate on the porch with Roy positioning himself so his scarred side was angled away from her. Abigail pretended not to notice, keeping the conversation light. "How long have you lived here?" she asked. "Since '65. After the war. You fought in the Civil War." He nodded once. "Union Army. Got these," he gestured vaguely to his scars at Petersburg. "Cannon fire hit an ammunition wagon." "I'm sorry," Abigail said quietly. "That must have been terrible. It was war." His tone was flat, but she could sense the pain beneath it. "Came west afterward. Needed space, solitude. And you found it here, until people started settling." A hint of bitterness crept into his voice. "They see the scars, they make up stories. Monster, devil, easier than seeing a man." Abigail's heart ached for him. "People fear what they don't understand." "And they don't want to understand." Roy stood abruptly. "Better finish that roof before sundown." Over the next few weeks, an unexpected friendship formed between them. Roy would appear occasionally, always with some practical reason, bringing a book, checking the fence, offering advice on managing the land. Abigail began to look forward to these visits, finding in Roy a depth and intelligence that belied his gruff exterior. The town noticed their friendship. When Abigail visited for supplies, she was met with concerned glances and not-so-subtle warnings. "That man is dangerous, Miss Turner," Mrs. Patterson, the banker's wife, told her one day. "What happened to those men years ago wasn't the half of it. There are other stories." "Such as?" Abigail challenged. Mrs. Patterson leaned closer. "They say he kidnapped a woman once, kept her prisoner in those caves of his, and when she tried to escape, well..." She drew a finger across her throat meaningfully. "That's ridiculous," Abigail snapped. "Who was this woman? What was her name?" "Well, I don't rightly know," Mrs. Patterson admitted, "but everyone knows the story." "Everyone knows rumors," Abigail corrected her. "I found Mr. Blackburn to be nothing but honorable." The banker's wife drew back, affronted. "You mark my words, Miss Turner. No good will come of associating with that creature." Abigail left town seething with anger. The baseless rumors and fear-mongering infuriated her. When she reached home, she was surprised to find Roy waiting on her porch, a concerned expression on his face. "Town giving you trouble?" he asked as she dismounted. "How did you know? Happened to your uncle too. Friendship with me comes at a cost." Abigail dropped onto the porch step beside him. "They're spreading ridiculous stories. A kidnapped woman, really?" Roy's jaw tightened. "That one's been around for years." "It's cruel and unfair. It's human nature." Roy's voice was resigned. "You should be careful, Abigail. Your reputation, my reputation, is my concern," she interrupted. "And I choose my own friends." Something flickered in his good eye, surprise, perhaps, or something deeper. "You consider us friends?" "Of course I do, don't you?" He looked away toward the mountains. "I haven't had a friend since your uncle died." Impulsively, Abigail reached out and touched his hand. He flinched but didn't pull away. "Well, you have one now." As summer turned to autumn, their friendship deepened. Roy taught Abigail about surviving in the Nevada wilderness, how to track game, predict weather, find water in the desert. In return, she shared stories from her life in Boston, read aloud from his books, and cooked meals that gradually coaxed rare smiles from him. Abigail began to see beyond his scars to the man beneath, intelligent, honorable, and far gentler than his reputation suggested. She found herself watching for his approach each day, her heart beating faster when she spotted him coming down from the hills. The townspeople's warnings grew more strident. Sheriff Mason paid her another visit, his concern evident. "Miss Turner, I've tried to respect your choices, but this has gone far enough. Your friendship with Blackburn is causing talk." "Let them talk," Abigail replied, continuing to shell peas on her porch. "It's more than talk. Some folks are saying he's bewitched you somehow. Others think you might be in danger but too frightened to ask for help." Abigail's hand stilled. "That's absurd. Roy has never been anything but respectful toward me," the sheriff sighed. "I know that. I've never thought Blackburn was the monster they make him out to be. But facts are facts. He did kill those men years back. In self-defense, by your own admission." "Yes, but," the sheriff removed his hat, running a hand through his graying hair. "Miss Turner, Abigail, I'm trying to help. There's talk of forming a group to rescue you." Abigail stood, alarmed. "Rescue me? From what?" "From him. Williams at the saloon is stirring things up. Says no decent woman would associate with a monster unless she was being coerced." "That's outrageous. I'll go to town myself and set them straight. That might make things worse." The sheriff replaced his hat. "Just be careful, and maybe see a bit less of Blackburn for a while until things calm down." After the sheriff left, Abigail paced her small cabin, anger and worry churning inside her. The thought of armed men coming to rescue her and what they might do to Roy filled her with dread. But the suggestion that she distance herself from him felt like a betrayal. That evening, as twilight settled over the valley, Abigail heard a horse approaching. Roy appeared, leading his black gelding and carrying a burlap sack. His expression was grim. "Sheriff paid you a visit," he stated, not a question. Abigail nodded. "You heard about the rescue party, news travels." He handed her the sack. "Venison should last you a while." Something in his tone made her heart sink. "You're leaving, going hunting in the high country. Be gone a few weeks." He wouldn't meet her eyes. "Give the town time to settle down." "Roy, you don't have to go. I'm not afraid of them." "You should be." His voice hardened. "You don't know what they're capable of when fear takes hold." and you're just going to let them win. Let them drive you away. Frustration and something deeper colored her words. Roy finally looked at her, his expression pained. I'm trying to protect you, Abigail. I don't need protection. She stopped, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, of the emotion making her voice tremble. What? He asked quietly. What do you need? Abigail took a deep breath. I need you to stop running, to stop letting them define who you are. And who am I if not the monster they say? You're Roy Blackburn, she said softly. A man who survived war and fire and hatred, who reads poetry and knows the language of birds and saved my home from flooding. You're no monster. You're... She hesitated, then finished in a whisper. You're mine. The word hung between them, fragile and momentous. Roy's good eye widened, and for a moment he seemed unable to speak. Abigail, he finally said, her name like a prayer on his lips. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. She stepped closer, reaching up to touch his scarred cheek. He flinched but didn't pull away. I've spent my whole life doing what was expected, being the proper Boston lady. Then I lost everything, came west and found freedom and you. I'm not worth this, Roy said hoarsely. The town will never accept. I don't care about the town, Abigail interrupted. I care about you. In the gathering darkness, with only the stars as witnesses, Roy Blackburn's carefully constructed walls began to crumble. Slowly, hesitantly, he raised his hand to cover hers where it rested against his scarred cheek. I should go, he whispered, but made no move to leave. Stay, Abigail said. Please. When his lips met hers, tentative and gentle, Abigail felt as though her heart might burst. The kiss deepened, years of loneliness and longing flowing between them like the creek that connected their lands. But their moment of happiness was short-lived. The sound of approaching horses broke them apart. Roy's expression instantly changed, alert and wary. He pushed Abigail behind him, reaching for the rifle he'd left leaning against her porch. Get inside, he ordered quietly. Roy, now, Abigail. His voice brooked no argument. She reluctantly stepped into the cabin but left the door open, watching as 5 riders approached, their faces shadowed beneath their hats. She recognized Williams from the saloon at their head. Evening, Blackburn, Williams called, his voice falsely jovial. Fine night for a ride, ain't it? You're trespassing, Roy replied evenly, though Abigail could see the tension in his shoulders. Williams chuckled, a sound without humor. Seems to me we're on Miss Turner's property. Ain't that right, boys? The men with him muttered agreement. And we've come to make sure the lady's safe and sound. I'm perfectly fine, Abigail called, stepping onto the porch, and Mr. Blackburn is here at my invitation. Is that so? Williams's tone was skeptical. Well now, Miss Turner, we've been hearing concerning things. That maybe you're not entirely free to speak your mind. That's absurd, Abigail snapped. I want you all to leave. Now. Williams ignored her, his attention fixed on Roy. You've caused enough trouble in this valley, Blackburn. First those men years back, now corrupting a decent woman. It's time you moved on. No one's moving anywhere, Abigail said firmly. Sheriff Mason is aware of everything that happens here, and he'll hold each of you accountable if you cause trouble. Sheriff's a half-day's ride away, Williams replied smoothly. Lots can happen in that time. His hand rested meaningfully on his holstered pistol. Roy's voice remained calm, but Abigail could hear the dangerous edge in it. You and your men are going to turn around and ride back to town. Miss Turner has made her wishes clear. Miss Turner don't know what she's saying, another rider called out. Everyone knows about your witchcraft, Blackburn, how you put spells on people. A ripple of agreement went through the group. Abigail felt a chill of genuine fear. These men were drunk, armed and operating on superstitious fear, a dangerous combination. There's no witchcraft, she tried again. Only neighborly friendship. That what you call it? William sneered. Sure looked like more than neighborly friendship when we rode up. One of the other men spat on the ground. Ain't natural, a woman like her with something like him. Roy's grip on his rifle tightened, but his voice remained steady. Last warning. Leave. Williams drew his pistol. Or what, monster? You'll kill us all like you did those others. No one needs to die tonight, Roy replied. But I will defend Miss Turner's property and her right to choose her own company. The tension stretched taut as a wire. Abigail's heart hammered in her chest. She could see the situation balancing on a knife's edge. One wrong move, and blood would be spilled. Suddenly, the sound of another horse approaching broke the standoff. Sheriff Mason rode into the yard, his expression thunderous. What in the hell is going on here? He demanded, dismounting quickly. Williams, put that damn gun away before I throw you in jail. Williams hesitated, then slowly holstered his pistol. We're just checking on Miss Turner's welfare, Sheriff, making sure she ain't being held against her will. Does she look like she's being held against her will? The sheriff asked dryly. Miss Turner, are you in need of rescue? Certainly not, Abigail replied firmly. I've been trying to tell these men to leave my property. Sheriff Mason nodded. You heard the lady, all of you back to town. Now. And if I hear about any more unauthorized rescue parties, there'll be consequences. Grumbling, Williams and his men turned their horses. As they rode away, Williams called back. This ain't over, Blackburn. No decent town wants your kind. When they were gone, the sheriff turned to Roy and Abigail with a sigh. I had a feeling they might try something like this. One of the Patterson boys overheard them planning in the saloon and came to warn me. Thank you, Sheriff, Abigail said sincerely. Don't thank me yet. His expression was grave. They'll be back, or others will. This kind of hatred doesn't die easily. Roy's face had returned to its usual impassive mask. She's not safe as long as I'm here. That's not true, Abigail protested. You're not the danger they are. He's right, in a way, the sheriff said gently. Their fear of him puts you at risk by association. Then they need to learn not to fear him, Abigail insisted. Roy is a good man who's been unjustly treated. Maybe so, the sheriff agreed, but changing minds takes time. And some minds don't want to be changed. After the sheriff departed, promising to keep an eye on Williams and his friends, Roy and Abigail sat quietly on her porch. The night had turned cool and stars filled the vast Nevada sky. I should go, Roy finally said. Being here puts you in danger. Running away solves nothing, Abigail countered. It just confirms what they believe, that you're something to be feared. Maybe I am. His voice was bitter. I've killed men, Abigail, in self-defense. There's a difference. She took his hand, feeling the roughness of calluses against her palm. Roy, I meant what I said before they came. You're not the monster they claim. He looked down at their joined hands. What if I can never be anything else in their eyes? Then we'll live with that, Abigail said simply. Or we'll go somewhere else together. Roy's head snapped up. Together. Yes, she met his gaze steadily. If you want that too. For a long moment he was silent. Then, with deliberate care, he raised her hand to his lips. I want that more than anything, but I need to be sure you understand what you're choosing. A life with me won't be easy. When has my life ever been easy? Abigail smiled softly. I lost my parents, lost our family fortune, traveled across the country alone to claim an inheritance in a place where I knew no one. Easy isn't what I'm looking for, Roy. I want real. I want true. And you think that's me? His voice held wonder and disbelief. I know it is. That night, Roy stayed. They talked until dawn, planning, dreaming, sharing the stories they'd kept hidden. As sunrise painted the valley in gold, they made a decision. They would face the town together. 2 days later, Abigail drove her wagon into Pyramid City with Roy beside her. Their arrival caused a sensation. Mothers hurried children indoors, men gathered in muttering groups, and Sheriff Mason watched worriedly from outside his office. Abigail held her head high as she and Roy entered the general store. The usual chatter fell silent. The storekeeper, Mr. Jenkins, looked from Abigail to Roy with undisguised shock. "Miss Turner," he stammered, "what can I help you with today?" "I need supplies," Abigail replied calmly. "And Mr. Blackburn requires ammunition for hunting." She began listing items while Roy stood silently beside her, his scarred face exposed to the staring crowd. As Jenkins reluctantly filled their order, the door opened, and Mrs. Patterson entered with her daughter. Seeing Roy, she gasped and pulled the girl behind her. "Mr. Jenkins, how could you allow that? That creature in here with decent folks?" she demanded. Before the storekeeper could respond, Abigail stepped forward. "Mrs. Patterson, Mr. Blackburn is my guest and has every right to be here. If his presence offends you, perhaps you should return later." The woman's face reddened. "Well, I never, Miss Turner, your behavior has become most inappropriate, consorting with him." "His name is Roy Blackburn," Abigail said firmly. "He fought for the Union in the war, was gravely injured at Petersburg, and has lived peacefully in this valley for 10 years. He is a man deserving of respect, not your fear and certainly not your contempt." Mrs. Patterson spluttered incoherently, then dragged her daughter from the store. As the door slammed behind them, Abigail turned back to the stunned storekeeper. "We'll also need coffee and sugar, please." Word spread quickly. By the time they finished their shopping, a crowd had gathered outside. Some faces were merely curious, others openly hostile. William stood among them, his expression dark with anger. "You're not welcome here, Blackburn," he called as Roy and Abigail loaded their wagon. Roy paused, then straightened to his full height. For the first time, he addressed the townspeople directly. "I've lived in this valley longer than most of you. I've harmed no one who didn't threaten me first. I buy my supplies with honest money and I keep to myself. If that makes me unwelcome, so be it." His deep voice, so rarely heard in town, had a powerful effect. Some in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Williams wasn't deterred. "You've bewitched Miss Turner somehow. No decent woman would choose to be with a monster like you." "That's enough," Abigail's voice rang out sharply. "Mr. Williams, your concern for my welfare would be touching if it weren't so insulting. I am a grown woman capable of making my own decisions. And I've decided that Roy Blackburn is a good, honorable man, more honorable, I might add, than those who spread vicious rumors and threaten innocent people based on nothing but fear and ignorance." An elderly man stepped forward, the town's doctor. Abigail had been told. "Miss Turner, you must understand our concern. Blackburn has lived as a hermit for years. He's killed men who were trespassing and threatening him," Abigail countered. "Would any of you have acted differently if armed strangers came onto your property with ill intent?" The doctor hesitated, then conceded, "Perhaps not. But the stories about the woman are just that, stories," Roy interrupted, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. "There was never any woman. I've lived alone since coming to Nevada." "Then why hide away?" someone called from the crowd. "Why live in caves like some animal if you've got nothing to hide?" Roy's jaw tightened. For a moment, Abigail thought he wouldn't answer. Then he touched his scarred face. "When people look at you like you're something from a nightmare, solitude becomes preferable to company." A heavy silence fell over the crowd. For many, it was the first time they'd heard him speak more than a few necessary words. The humanity in his voice, The pain and dignity was unmistakable. Sheriff Mason stepped forward. "Folks, I've known Roy Blackburn for 10 years. Never known him to lie or cheat or harm anyone who didn't deserve it. If Miss Turner vouches for him, that's good enough for me." He turned to Abigail and Roy. "You two best be on your way before this gets any more heated. I'll handle things here." As they drove out of town, Abigail could feel the weight of stares on their backs. Roy sat rigid beside her, his expression unreadable. "It's a start," she said quietly once they were beyond the town limits. "A start to what?" he asked, finally looking at her. "They'll never accept me, Abigail." Today made that clear. "I disagree. They listened, some of them anyway. Change takes time." "We may not have that luxury," Roy said grimly. "Williams and his kind won't be persuaded by words." Abigail reached over to take his hand. "Then we'll face whatever comes, together." In the days that followed, Abigail continued to make her regular trips to town, sometimes with Roy, sometimes alone. Each visit became slightly less dramatic than the last. A few townsfolk even began to nod politely to Roy, though many still avoided him entirely. Sheriff Mason reported that opinion in town was divided. Some, particularly the older residents who remembered Roy's arrival after the war, were willing to reconsider their views. Others, led by Williams, remained adamantly opposed to his presence. "He's stirring up trouble," the sheriff warned during a visit to Abigail's ranch. "Talking about forming a committee for public safety. It's nonsense, of course, but dangerous nonsense." Roy, who had been repairing a corral fence, joined them on the porch. "What are you suggesting, Sheriff?" "I'm not sure," Mason admitted. "Just be vigilant, and maybe consider whether this valley is worth the trouble." After he left, Roy and Abigail sat in thoughtful silence. Finally, Roy spoke. "He's right. Maybe we should consider leaving, starting fresh somewhere else." "Running won't solve anything," Abigail argued. "This is our home, both our homes. We've done nothing wrong." "Sometimes right and wrong don't matter as much as survival." Roy's voice was grim. "I won't risk your safety for my pride." "It's not about pride, it's about justice." Abigail took his hands in hers. "Roy, I love you. I won't let fear and ignorance drive us from our home." It was the first time she'd said the words. Roy's expression softened, the stern lines of his face relaxing into tenderness. "I love you too. That's why I'd leave this valley or this earth before I'd let harm come to you." Their lips met in a kiss that sealed their commitment. Whatever came, they would face it united. What came was fire. 3 nights later, Abigail awoke to the smell of smoke. Roy, who had taken to sleeping in a bedroll on her porch to maintain propriety while staying close enough to protect her, burst through the door. "Get dressed quickly," he ordered. "The barn's on fire." They rushed outside to find the barn engulfed in flames. The horses were screaming in terror. Without hesitation, Roy ran toward the burning structure, Abigail close behind. Together, they managed to free the panicked animals and drive them to safety. As they watched the barn burn, helpless to save it, Abigail spotted movement at the edge of her property, riders disappearing into the night. "Williams," Roy growled, having seen them too. "We need to report this to the sheriff," Abigail said, coughing from the smoke. "By the time he gets here, they'll have alibis ready." Roy's expression was dark with fury. "This is just the beginning, Abigail. Next time it might be the cabin. With you in it." Fear gripped her, not for herself but for what Roy might do. "Promise me you won't go after them." "I can't promise that," he replied honestly. "If they threaten you again, violence will only confirm what they believe about you," Abigail pleaded. "We need another way." In the orange glow of the burning barn, Roy's scarred face looked demonic, exactly the monster the town believed him to be. But his eyes, when they met hers, held only love and determination. "All right," he agreed reluctantly. We'll try another way, but I won't let them hurt you. Morning revealed the full extent of the damage. The barn was a smoldering ruin. Miraculously, all the animals had survived, though one horse had suffered burns that would need careful tending. Sheriff Mason arrived shortly after dawn, his expression grim as he surveyed the destruction. Williams, he asked simply. Roy nodded. Him and at least 3 others didn't see their faces clearly. Did you recognize the horses? Too dark, Roy admitted, but they rode toward town, not the hills. The sheriff sighed heavily. I'll question him, but without proof. We know who did this, Abigail said angrily. Everyone knows. Knowing isn't proving, Mason replied. And even if I arrested him, what then? The town's divided enough already. Half would see it as justice, half as persecution of a man protecting the community from a monster. His blunt assessment hung in the air. Roy's expression didn't change, but Abigail could sense his resignation. This was the reality he'd lived with for years, justice defined differently for a man with his face and reputation. What do you suggest? She asked the sheriff. Mason removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. I don't know, but this situation can't continue. Someone's going to get killed. After he left, promising to investigate but offering little hope of consequences for the arsonists, Abigail and Roy sat amidst the ruins of her barn. We could rebuild, she suggested, though her voice lacked conviction. They'd just burn it again, Roy replied. Or worse. Abigail leaned against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. I won't let them drive us apart. No, he agreed, wrapping an arm around her. But perhaps they could drive us elsewhere. She looked up at him. You still think we should leave? I think we should consider all options. Roy's gaze was fixed on the distant mountains. My family had land in Colorado, good land near Denver. I never claimed it after the war, didn't think I had any use for it. But it's still there, according to the letters I've received. Colorado, Abigail tried to imagine it. It's beautiful country. Growing fast since they found silver, a new place might not care so much about old scars and stories. The idea held appeal, a fresh start, away from the hatred and fear. But something in Abigail rebelled against being forced out. Running feels like letting them win, she said softly. Roy turned to face her. Living well somewhere else feels like winning to me. Abigail, I've fought my share of battles. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't standing your ground, it's knowing when to find better ground. His wisdom struck her deeply. Perhaps this wasn't surrender but strategy, a different kind of courage. If we go, she said slowly, we go on our terms. Not driven out in the night like criminals. A rare smile touched Roy's lips. What did you have in mind? 2 days later, Abigail posted notices around town. The Turner Ranch would be sold at auction the following week. All interested parties were invited to attend. The announcement created exactly the stir she'd anticipated. Sheriff Mason rode out immediately. You're really leaving? He asked, his disappointment evident. We're really selling this property, Abigail corrected. What happens after depends on certain conditions. The sheriff raised an eyebrow. What conditions? Abigail smiled. You'll see at the auction. Word spread quickly. Some townsfolk expressed genuine regret that Abigail was leaving. Others, particularly those in Williams's circle, celebrated what they saw as a victory, the monster finally driven away. The day of the auction dawned clear and cool. A surprising number of people made the journey to the Turner Ranch. Some came out of genuine interest in the property, others from curiosity about the circumstances of the sale. Roy remained out of sight as Abigail greeted the arrivals. Sheriff Mason was present, as were Mr. Jenkins from the general store, several ranchers from outlying properties, and as expected Williams and his friends. When everyone had assembled in the yard, Abigail stepped onto her porch to address them. Her voice was clear and confident as she described the property, its water rights, its good pasture, the quality of its soil. "Before we begin the bidding," she continued, "there are certain conditions attached to this sale that you should all understand." A murmur went through the crowd. Williams called out, "What kind of conditions?" "First," Abigail said firmly, "the water rights for this property are permanently shared with the northern adjacent land. This arrangement cannot be altered by any future owner." Williams snorted. "That's Blackburn's land." "Why would anyone agree to that?" "Because it's a fair and necessary arrangement that benefits both properties," Abigail replied calmly. "Second condition, a portion of the sale price will be used to establish a fund for war veterans in Pyramid City, to be administered by Sheriff Mason and Dr. Lewis." This announcement was met with surprised approval from many present. Even Williams looked momentarily disarmed. "Final condition," Abigail continued. "Before any bids are accepted, I require a public apology and acknowledgement of wrongdoing from those who burned my barn 3 nights ago." Dead silence fell over the gathering. All eyes turned to Williams and his companions, who shifted uncomfortably. "That's outrageous," Williams finally spluttered. "You can't prove anything." "I'm not asking for proof," Abigail replied. "I'm asking for honesty and accountability. Without it, there will be no sale." "This is a trick," one of Williams's friends called out. "She's just trying to stir up trouble before she leaves." Abigail's gaze swept the crowd. "Is it a trick to ask for justice? Is it troublemaking to expect honest men to admit when they've done wrong?" "You're just protecting that monster," Williams accused, his face reddening. "Even now, when you're leaving because of him." "I'm not leaving because of Roy Blackburn," Abigail said clearly. "I'm leaving because of men like you, Mr. Williams, men who let fear and hatred guide their actions, who burn barns in the night and call themselves righteous." The tension in the yard was palpable. Sheriff Mason moved closer to Abigail, his hand resting on his holster. Then, unexpectedly, one of the younger men in Williams's group stepped forward. "I was there," he admitted, his voice shaking slightly. "I helped set that fire, and I'm sorry, Miss Turner, it wasn't right." Williams turned on him furiously. "Shut your mouth, Parker." "No," the young man replied, straightening his shoulders. "It wasn't right. We could have killed those animals or Miss Turner herself. My pa didn't raise me to do such things." His confession broke the dam. Another of Williams's companions stepped forward to offer his own apology, then another. Only Williams himself and one other man remained defiant. "Traitors," Williams spat. "She's bewitched you too." "No, Tom," Sheriff Mason said heavily. "They've just found their consciences, something you might consider looking for yourself." With the confessions made, Abigail proceeded with the auction. The bidding was spirited, with the property eventually selling to a family newly arrived from California, people with no history in the valley and no preconceptions about its inhabitants. As the crowd dispersed, many paused to wish Abigail well in her future. A few even nodded respectfully toward the porch, where Roy had finally emerged to stand beside her. Williams and his remaining loyal friend departed without speaking, their defeat evident in their rigid backs and angry expressions. "That was quite a performance," Sheriff Mason said admiringly to Abigail when only he remained. "You got your justice after all." "Some measure of it," she agreed. "Though I doubt Mr. Williams will have a change of heart." "Probably not," the sheriff conceded. "But you've given others something to think about. That's a start." He turned to Roy. "So, Colorado," Roy nodded. "I have land near Denver. We'll leave once the sale is finalized." "As husband and wife?" the sheriff asked bluntly. Abigail felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she met his gaze steadily. Yes, if you know a minister who wouldn't object. Mason smiled. As it happens, my brother's a minister over in Carson City. He's seen enough of life not to judge a man by his scars. 2 weeks later, in a small church in Carson City, Roy Blackburn and Abigail Turner were married. The ceremony was simple, attended only by Sheriff Mason, his brother, and a few others who had shown kindness during their time in Pyramid Valley. As they exchanged vows, Abigail looked up into Roy's face, scarred and stern, but filled with a love and wonder that transformed him. In that moment, she saw not the monster of legend but the man she had come to know, brave, honorable, gentle with her despite his formidable strength. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. When Roy bent to kiss her, his touch was tender, almost reverent. Later, as they prepared for the journey to Colorado, Abigail found Roy standing at the edge of his property, looking out over the valley that had been his solitary home for so many years. "Having second thoughts?" she asked, slipping her arm through his. He shook his head. "No. Just saying goodbye to the past." "Are you sad to leave?" Roy considered the question seriously. "Parts of it. This land taught me to live again when I thought I was already dead, but it was never really home." He turned to her, his good eye softening. "Home is where you are now." The journey to Colorado took them through mountains and valleys, across rivers and plains. It was arduous at times, but they faced each challenge together. Along the way, they began to notice something. The further they traveled from Pyramid Valley, the less Roy's scars seemed to matter to those they encountered. Without the weight of his fearsome reputation preceding him, Roy was judged more by his actions than his appearance. His strength, intelligence, and quiet dignity earned respect from fellow travelers. Abigail watched with joy as her husband gradually straightened his shoulders, no longer trying to hide his scarred face from strangers. The land near Denver exceeded their expectations. Nestled in a valley with views of the Rocky Mountains, the Blackburn property offered rich soil, ample water, and proximity to the growing city without sacrificing privacy. They built their home together, a sturdy cabin at first, with plans for a larger house as their means allowed. Roy's knowledge of the land combined with Abigail's determination made their homestead prosper quickly. When winter came, bringing snow and bitter cold to the high country, they faced it with well-stocked cellars and a warm, secure home. On the longest nights, they would sit before their fire, reading from their growing collection of books or simply talking, planning their future together. It was on such a night, with snow falling silently outside their windows, that Abigail shared her news. "Roy," she said softly, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach, "we're going to have a child." His expression transformed from confusion to wonder to overwhelming joy. For a moment, he seemed unable to speak. Then he gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of the most precious glass. "A child," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Our child." Later that night, as Abigail slept in his arms, Roy lay awake, watching the firelight play across her peaceful face. He thought of the journey that had brought them together, a scarred, solitary man and a brave, determined woman, finding in each other what the world had convinced them they couldn't have. He thought of the child growing within her, a new life that would know nothing of monsters or fear, only love and protection. He silently vowed that this child would never know the pain of rejection or the weight of others' hatred. Spring brought new life to their valley. As the world turned green around them, Abigail's body changed, her stomach rounding with their growing child. Roy watched these changes with awe and tenderness, his protective instincts strengthened by her vulnerability. Their nearest neighbors, the Hendersons, became friends, the first real friends either of them had known in years. The Hendersons had 3 boisterous children who quickly adopted Mr. and Mrs. Blackburn as honorary aunt and uncle, showing no fear of Roy's scarred face. "Children see clearly," Mrs. Henderson remarked to Abigail one afternoon as they watched Roy patiently teaching the Henderson boys how to whittle. "They haven't learned to judge by appearances yet." "Some adults never learn that lesson," Abigail replied, resting a hand on her growing belly. "Their loss," Mrs. Henderson said simply. "My Jacob says your Roy is the finest neighbor we could ask for. Helped save our cow when she was calving wrong last month. Man like that's worth 10 pretty faces." In early autumn, with the aspens turning gold on the mountainsides, Abigail went into labor. The midwife from town was summoned, but the baby came too quickly for help to arrive. Roy found himself delivering his own child, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he helped bring their son into the world. "He's perfect," Abigail whispered as she held their newborn for the first time. "Look at him, Roy, so perfect and strong." Roy couldn't speak. His heart was too full as he gazed at his wife and son. The boy was indeed perfect, tiny fingers, dark hair, and skin unmarred by any scar or blemish. "We should name him after your father," Abigail suggested. "Thomas, wasn't it?" Roy nodded, finally finding his voice. "Thomas. Yes." When the midwife finally arrived, she found the new family already peacefully settled, mother and baby resting comfortably, father standing guard with fierce protectiveness and unashamed tears in his eyes. As Thomas grew, so did their homestead. The small cabin gave way to a proper house with room for their expanding family. They added cattle and horses to their holdings, and Roy's knowledge of the land helped them prosper, even during the dry years that challenged many of their neighbors. Abigail gave birth to a daughter 2 years after Thomas, a girl they named Elizabeth after Abigail's mother. Like her brother, she showed no fear of her father's scarred face. Indeed, the children seemed to find nothing unusual about it, accepting it as simply part of who their father was. "Why do people in town sometimes stare at you, Papa?" 6-year-old Thomas asked one day after a trip to Denver. Roy and Abigail exchanged glances. They had known this question would come eventually. "Because I look different," Roy answered honestly. "I was hurt in a war long before you were born." "Does it hurt still?" the boy asked with childish concern. "No," Roy assured him, drawing his son onto his lap. "Not anymore." "Then why do they stare? That's not polite. Mama says so." "Your mama is right," Roy agreed, smiling at Abigail over their son's head. "But people often stare at things they don't understand or that surprise them." Thomas considered this, then nodded solemnly. "Like when I saw that circus elephant. I couldn't stop staring because I'd never seen anything like it before." "Something like that," Roy agreed, relieved at his son's simple acceptance. As their children grew, so did the community around them. Denver expanded rapidly, and their once isolated homestead found itself part of a growing settlement. Roy, once so determined to avoid human contact, became a respected figure in the community, known for his fair dealings, his hard-working nature, and his unwavering support of his wife and children. Occasionally, travelers from Nevada would pass through, and news of Pyramid Valley would reach them. They learned that Williams had eventually left the area after gambling away his property. Sheriff Mason had retired, handing his badge to a younger man. The town itself had grown, attracting new settlers who knew nothing of the monster who had once lived in the nearby hills. 10 years after leaving Nevada, Roy and Abigail received a letter from Sheriff Mason. He was visiting family in Denver and asked if he might call on them. They welcomed him warmly to their prosperous ranch. "I almost didn't recognize you," Mason admitted to Roy as they sat on the wide porch of the Blackburn home. "You've changed." Roy smiled, watching his children playing in the yard with their dog. "Life changes a man." "It's more than that," Mason insisted. "You stand taller. You look people in the eye." He glanced at Abigail, who was bringing coffee to the porch, "though I suspect the change started before you left Nevada." Abigail set down the tray and took a seat beside her husband, her hand naturally finding his. "How is Pyramid City?" she asked. "Growing," Mason replied. "New mine opened up in the hills, your hills, as a matter of fact, Roy. The company bought the land from your successor last year." "And the stories?" Roy asked quietly. "Do they still tell tales of the monster in the hills?" The former sheriff's expression grew thoughtful. "Some of the old-timers still do, but it's becoming just another legend, like ghost stories around a campfire. Most folks these days don't believe a word of it." After Mason left, promising to visit again when next in Colorado, Roy and Abigail walked through their orchard, where apple trees they had planted in their first year were now bearing fruit. The mountains rose majestically before them, and behind them stood their home solid, welcoming, filled with the evidence of their life together. "Do you ever regret leaving?" Abigail asked, though she already knew the answer. Roy stopped, turning to face her. At 45, his hair was showing strands of silver, and new lines had joined the scars on his face. But his good eye still held the same depth and intelligence that had first drawn her to him. "Never," he said firmly. "That place held nothing for me but solitude and bitterness until you came." He cupped her face gently. "You saw the man beneath the scars when everyone else saw only the monster. You called me yours when I believed I belonged to no one." Abigail leaned into his touch. "I remember the first time you truly smiled at me," she said softly. "It was like watching ice melt in the spring sun, something hard and frozen giving way to warmth and life." Roy pulled her close, his arms enfolding her as they had countless times over their years together. In his embrace, she found the same security and love that had sustained them through hardship and joy alike. "They called me a monster," he whispered against her hair, "but you called me yours." "And I always will," Abigail promised, rising on tiptoe to kiss him as their children's laughter echoed through the orchard, and the Colorado sunset painted the mountains gold behind them. In that moment, as in so many before it, the monster of Pyramid Valley existed only in distant memory, a shadow long since banished by the light of love, and the healing power of being truly seen for who he was, not what tragedy had made of him.